Welcome to the Network for Responsible Public Policy. I'm Jenny Wilson, a trustee of NFRPP. In keeping with our mission to bring timely, fact-based programs to educate, inform, and foster civic engagement, tonight we focus the discussion on the reality of income inequality in America. Inflation and affordability are foremost in the minds of many Americans. There is a visibly widening gap between those who are doing well and those who are struggling to get by. Economic disparities are near historic highs and are exacerbated by rising prices driven by global and domestic events. What does this struggle say about the strength of our democracy? What are the causes of this growing disparity? And are there practical and responsible approaches to address it? Tonight's expert panel is well positioned to address these and other questions. Dean Baker co-founded the Center for Economic Policy Research. His areas of research include housing, macroeconomics, intellectual property, Social Security, Medicare, and European labor markets. Dean's blog, Beat the Press, provides commentary on economic reporting. Dean received his BA from Swarthmore College and his PhD in economics from the University of Michigan. William D. Cohen is the author of the New York Times bestsellers House of Cards and The Last Tycoons, which won the 2007 Financial Times and Goldman Sachs Business Book of the Year award. He's a contributing editor at Vanity Fair, has a bi-weekly opinion column in the New York Times, and writes frequently for the Financial Times, Fortune, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post, among other publications. A former investment banker, Cohen is a graduate of Duke University, the Columbia University School of Journalism, and the Columbia University Graduate School of Business. And tonight, we're pleased to welcome back our good friend Peter Coy, tonight's moderator. Peter is a freelance journalist covering economics, business, and finance. He was previously a staff writer for the Associated Press, Business Week, Bloomberg Business Week, and the opinion section of the New York Times. Peter is a graduate of Cornell University. Please take time to read their complete bios on our website, nfrpp.org. We look forward to a great discussion from this panel and to questions from the NFRPP audience. Please type your questions into the Q&A box, and we will respond to as many as time allows. Dean, William, and Peter, thank you for joining the Network for Responsible Public Policy tonight. Let's get started.
Thanks, Jenny. Great introduction. Let's dive right into it. We're talking about inequality. I'm going to start with Dean. Dean, what's all this about inequality? What's the problem? And if you want to get into it, what's the solution?
Well, the problem is by just about every measure, there's been an explosion of inequality. People focus a lot on wealth, and we see that in particular the top 1%, and it's been even more extreme, top 1/10 of 1% or even 1/100th of 1% have just accumulated massive amounts of wealth relative to the rest of society. And that's something that started really around 1980. It accelerated around 2000, particularly the movement to the top 1% or top 1/10 of 1%. And yeah, I think to my view, a lot of people's view, this is a really serious problem. It's a very serious problem for democracy. We'll have a chance to go into more detail, but the big point I'd like to make, and I try to make in just about everything I write, is I think most of the story is actually before tax story, and it's about how we structure the market.
Can I
And I
stop you
think
for a
there's an
second?
enormous.
Stop you for a second, Dean. You said a before tax problem. Let's define terms for the audience. What do you mean by a before tax problem? Dean just went off camera because he's having a little
Yeah.
trouble with his
So
network.
there's, yeah, hopefully that does the trick here. Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have been clear. So there is an issue that taxes have become less progressive. I mean, just the crudest example, and it's a more complicated issue, but the crudest example, if we go back to the 50s, the top marginal tax rate was 90%. Today, it's 37%. It's a little more complicated than that because there's issues of loopholes. I won't go into that. But my point has been that the big rise in inequality hasn't been due to the change in the tax structure. It's been due to the way we've structured the market. And that's where I think people have been way too lazy. There's a tendency to say, oh, the market created inequality. we have to try and address that with tax and transfer policy, which I think is great. We should address it with tax and transfer policy. But the point I always make is we could structure the market differently. And I'll just give a few examples because it go on forever with this. Just the most obvious patent and copyright monopolies. That's not the market. That's the government. You're free to say those are good policies. We understand that. Patents are to promote innovation, copyrights to promote creative work. We understand that. But those are government policies. And there are alternative ways to provide incentives for innovation. There's alternative ways to provide incentives for creative work. And what's more, even if we want patents and copyrights, how long they are, how strong they are, entirely matters of public policy. The market didn't do that. To take another section, Bill's familiar with this, finance. Suppose, most of us, we buy a shirt, we buy food, you pay a sales tax. Suppose we had a very small sales tax on stock trades and other financial transactions. You'd radically downsize the financial sector, get rid of a lot of the big fortunes there. Another thing, private equity. Suppose we said that the private equity companies, when they put a firm into bankruptcy, which they often do, suppose you said they're liable for the debts, because as it stands now, they could put a firm into bankruptcy and just go, see you later. Well, that's not the market. That's our bankruptcy law. Labor capital relations. We often talk about, the idea, oh, the government should help workers. I think it should. But the rules of labor capital relations, those aren't given to us by the market. In the United States, we outlaw secondary boycotts. If a restaurant is being struck by its workers, another union can't, okay, we're going to boycott the suppliers. We'll have a strike. They can't do that. They would be fined and ultimately could go to jail for that. There's a whole set of rules. Again, I won't go into the whole story, but my point is we could structure the market hugely differently in ways that would not generate as much inequality. And the reason it has been structured to create inequality is quite obvious. The people benefit from it, are happy do that, and they reinforce it, and they're very happy that we don't even discuss most of these issues. So that's kind of where I'd lay things down.
Okay, Dean, this is good. I want to stick with this a little bit before we go to Bill, just because you got a good coherent train of thought going here. Maybe I just make sure that the audience gets what you're saying about pre-tax versus post-tax. What you're saying is that relying on the tax system to correct inequality that's brought about by the market is not the right way. It's better to have it so that incomes are kind of more equal pre-tax, and so there's less required of the tax system. That's your main point, right?
Exactly. And, again, I'm not going to ever argue against tax and transfer policy. I think they're very important and very helpful. But, if we brought our conservatives out here and we said, okay, we want a big progressive tax, we're going to have a wealth tax, we're going to have whatever, they're going to give all these arguments that people will find ways to evade it. People will cheat. They'll move out. If California might have a wealth tax and all the billionaires are going to leave. That's not true, but some of them will leave. I think it's much better not to have the inequality in the first place. And that's what I see as the bigger problem.
Now, what about people who say that we're in an era of skill-biased technological change? That is to say, that people are making a lot of money because of their skills, and the people who are not making a lot of money is because they don't have market skills. How does that fit into your worldview, Dean?
I think that's kind of a make it up as you go along story, because it has view for a long time. And, back in the 80s and 90s, the skills were supposed to be those who had college education as opposed to those who didn't. That's not been the divide anymore. So that was a divide, still most people in the workforce don't have a college degree. I have to check the latest numbers, roughly 40%, probably a little less. That's not the divide. The big divide has been between the top 1% and really the 99% after that. And again, as far as the skills, again, just to take some of these points, suppose we didn't have patents, suppose we didn't have copyrights. Let's return to, I think it's very important to provide incentive mechanisms for innovation, for creative work. So I'm not saying that, we'd get the same innovation if we didn't provide any incentives, but we could have very different incentives. So it wasn't just that suddenly those skills created a much greater premium, What happened was, though we made those laws longer and stronger. Copyright used to be, I think it was 45 years. Now we're up to 95 years. We applied it to the internet. That wasn't God that did that. We had to pass legislation to do that. In the case of patents, we made those longer. We made them stronger. You could patent life forms. You could patent software. You could patent business methods. You don't have to have that. And then also, so there's the penalty for, what if you violate a patent? I mean, people violate laws all the time. I jaywalk. I don't go to jail for it. What are the, so my point is just we structure that. We could structure it any which way, and we've chosen to structure in a way that redistributes a huge amount of income upward. And just to take my poster child, I'd like to say that if the government didn't threaten to arrest people for using Microsoft software without Bill Gates' permission, he'd still be working for a living. Now he's probably getting Social Security, but the point is that's what made him very rich.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So we're going to turn to Bill now. Bill, I want you to answer the question any way you want, but one of the things I do want to ask you, especially because of the kind of writing you do, you might have thoughts on this. To what degree is the inequality a matter of uh, engendering jealousy or anger towards the rich and making people feel like they can't get ahead because they see other people who are way ahead of them? So that would be a matter of not just the data, but perceptions.
Yeah. Let me answer that by first saying I thought Dean was going to mention one of my favorite structural bugaboos, and that is the tax deductibility of interest, which, is a completely random decision by taxing authorities. There would probably be no private equity business without the tax deductibility of interest, which of course allows people to put in very little amount of equity and buy companies with that little amount of equity and borrowing a lot of debt, and the interest expense is largely tax deductible, and then that makes the whole leveraged buyout spreadsheet calculus work beautifully sometimes, which is how these deals get done. So without that, there probably never would have been a leveraged buyout business, which began in the early 80s and continues to this day. And in fact, people have argued that the Paramount Skydance takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery is a big leveraged buyout, $79 billion of debt. And I'm sure a large portion of that debt is interest is tax deductible. And that's created, a huge amount of wealth. And to your point, Peter, about, creating sort of envy and jealousy, I remember, when I was a M&A banker on Wall Street at Lazard, among other places, if you could be an M&A banker at Lazard, that was kind of like your highest and best use as a Wall Street banker. And then this thing came along like private equity and leveraged buyouts, and like next thing you know, the Henry Kravises, and George Roberts of the world, and Ted Forstmans, and Steve Schwartzmans were getting fabulously rich, and the rest of us looked like pikers. And all of a sudden, everybody wanted to be a private equity guy. And of course, you couldn't be a private equity guy if you weren't a private equity guy, or you didn't have the guts to go out on your own, because, back then they weren't these big publicly traded behemoths that, became big corporate entities. And I noticed a lot of the times, again, to your point, on Wall Street. I mean, and I had started as a journalist, so getting paid basically, relatively speaking, nothing. And next thing you know, I'm a banker getting much better paid, and everybody is getting well paid just because of what? Because you're like interstitial men who are like taking fees from taking little crumbs of everybody's deals, and that's making you, pretty damn wealthy, and yet you still weren't happy because the guy in the office next to you was, got a $2 million bonus and you only got $1.5 million bonus. So what the hell's going on here? So, and I think it's just exploded, frankly, from there. Now it's, Elon Musk is worth, $750 billion. For what? How? Why? I mean, I guess to some extent it's because of the skills that you alluded to before that have differentiated him. He's obviously very smart and has created a lot of industries and created a lot of value. And what he does with those rockets is astounding. Um, so he's definitely getting rewarded for his skills, but he's also getting rewarded because he's like a cult figure, and investors are willing to sort of go along in a big way with anything that he does. And we're going to see that with the SpaceX IPO, which I think is going to be by far the largest IPO ever in history, like dwarfing Aramco, which was like a $25 billion IPO. This is going to be 75 billion. Are you kidding me? So, this sort of financial class of financial engineers that we've literally created out of whole cloth, I think largely because of government policy, with some innovation, yes, and some, crazy inability of investors to recognize that they're kind of being taken for a ride, has added absolutely to the inequality equation that we're all witnessing and wondering what we do about it.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying that somebody who's worth only $100 billion is going to be envious of Elon Musk. It's like,
Yeah.
it's
I
just
think
so unfair. Some people, he's so rich. And look at me, I have only $100 billion.
I know you're saying that tongue in cheek, but we both know that you're absolutely right, that there are people who think that way. I mean, why would you? I mean, what keeps Steve Schwartzman in his mid 70s, the late 70s, continuing onward? He's got 50 billion, $60 billion. Isn't that enough? He's got 25 houses. He's every place you could think of, he's got a house, and he's still going at it. Why? I'm sure John Gray, who's his number two, is wondering, like, what the heck is going on here? When are you going to step aside, Steve, and let me, run this place? But they keep going. Henry Kravis keeps going. Ken Griffin keeps going. Nelson Peltz. They all. Carl Icahn. Carl Icahn is in his late 80s, early 90s. He's even lost his fortune, and he's still going.
So we're talking about the stratospheric heights here, but of course this applies all the way down to the very poorest people in the world. I've just been reading a lot lately about sort of the great American middle class and whether there are more signs, whether inequality is more obvious now than it used to be, or whether it bites more than it used to. For example, if you don't have enough money to buy a house in the town with the good schools. Robert Frank, Cornell professor, has written a lot about this, the kind of the winner-take-all society, and the idea that there might be one prize that people have to compete for. And so there's only a certain number of houses in this particular town everybody wants to live in. And so you're going to feel like inadequate. You're going to feel like you lost out in the race if you're not one of the people who can afford to live in that particular town or something else or get into that particular college, because that's the college everybody wants to get into. I just wonder if this is more of an issue than before, or if it's always been like this.
Well, if you're
I don't
asking
think doubt
me,
it's always good.
well, I'll just
Go ahead.
quickly go. I mean, I think that in a nutshell, Peter,
Yeah,
is
that's
is
good.
why Donald Trump has gotten elected twice, because there's that whole swath of Americans who feel like they've missed out on the American dream, and he's their savior for it. I think they're misguided in many ways in thinking that, but I think that's helps explain a little bit of his getting elected twice, because there are people who can't afford that house in the nice neighborhood, or who do not get to go to the college of their choice, or don't even feel like they can get into college or afford much of anything besides their basic sustenance, and there's no safety net anymore. So they, turn to somebody who's a system buster, or who they think will be a system buster, who can, look out for their needs.
Yeah. Dean, you want to say something?
Yeah, there's no doubt there's a lot to that. I mean, I guess we're all old here, but people prepared for their MedCats. You take a full course now. I mean, it's like, you take a months to, I don't know if it's a month long exactly, but I mean, back when I was in school, people took a week, you know, work at school or whatever. I mean, it really has all professional schools. So there is definitely that, but I think some of the things have been overstated. Not to say people don't have troubles they do, but particularly housing. I mean, I pick on that 'cause I've spent a lot of time working on it. The big run up in New York were always expensive, so that's true, but that was true 30 years ago. But the big run up, we saw a huge run up in house prices relative to income or relative to whatever you want in the last 5 years with the pandemic, as people suddenly were working from home and they, at least initially, they had the pandemic checks, we had very low interest rates. That was the big run up in house prices. So I think that's a little bit exaggerated. But definitely, I mean, there is an idea that there's only so many slots in Harvard or whatever it might be. So that definitely does create this sort of resentment. And again, I don't know how many of the people who are voting for Trump expected to go to Harvard, but I think there is an idea by many of those people. I mean, they say that. I'm not speculating. They say that. Maybe they don't actually have it. That people who do have these things, who did go to a good college or what's considered a good college, look down on them. And yeah, that is a problem.
Yeah. I, I just think that there's been a lot of discussion about affordability lately, and a lot of people have said it seems to be a puzzle in that the real incomes have risen. This is something, real income meaning even after you take inflation into account, people's purchasing power has gone up. And there's some controversy around that, but that's what most of the numbers seem to show. And of course, that's a median number. That's the person in the middle of the income structure. But it's not necessarily the poor who have done worse. There have been periods where people who are below median have had faster rises in inflation-adjusted income than the rich. So I think we really need to address that a little bit here, because sometimes it's just said everything's become unaffordable as if it's an incontrovertible fact, and that's not all the evidence points in that direction. Dean, let me start with you on that one.
Yeah, no, it's a really good, very incredibly important point. I knew a lot of people in the Biden administration, and I was following the data closely, and I was very frustrated with all these people saying, "Oh, it's impossible. People can't make ends meet," and I was harassing the people I knew in the administration, going, "How come you guys aren't touting your record? We could look at that, and I was convinced, and I am convinced that some of this, and I'd see all these people saying, "Oh, I work at 3 jobs and I still can't pay for my groceries or whatever." They all disappeared right after the election. So some of that clearly was manufactured, but it's continued, and it's been bipartisan. So after a while, okay, there might well be, there must be to me, and I'm not going to say it's the whole story, but if you look at healthcare, if we measure it in our inflation indexes, the personal consumption expenditure deflator. I don't want to get into details on this, but whichever inflation index you measure, it's not measuring what people pay for health as a specific drug. No one in their right mind thinks of healthcare that way. They think of healthcare, how much do I have to pay for my premium, my copay, my deductible, out-of-pocket expenditures? That's how they think of healthcare. that's risen far more rapidly in our healthcare inflation in our indexes. So, it's not there's I don't know if that would fully explain the issue of affordability, what people are complaining about as compared to what our measures of real income show. But it's clear to me that health is rising, and the cost of it as people see it is rising considerably more rapidly. Or not, I'm not going to argue, but I think that is part of the story.
It's so funny. I just looked at the Q&As to see what was coming in, and there's a question exactly about healthcare. So I might as well pose it to you, and I'll get to Bill in a second. But the question from an anonymous attendee is, the American people are hungry for cheaper healthcare and affordable education, yet this seems to be politically unpopular for the most part. Do you ever see an incentive for our politicians to agree to make such things more affordable? And if not, why? What do you have to say?
I'm sorry if you figured out I have internet problems, but anyhow, I think that it is possible. I mean, you've had an effort to try and lower drug prices, and it's been bipartisan. Trump has been, he has his Trump RX. I mean, I wouldn't suggest that's the best way to go, but there is bipartisan support for lower drug prices, and that is something. I'd love to see us get to Medicare for all, and I don't think that's impossible to envision, but you really have to plan that through carefully. I mean, because obviously it could go badly, and that would set back any sort of healthcare reform for many, many years. But I think, there are, I'll put it this way, that there are things that can be done to reduce care costs, but I think the longer term answer is we should be looking to a universal care program.
Okay, now I want to get more questions from you, in the audience. So if you don't see the Q&A box in the bottom panel of your screen, click on more, and then the Q&A should show up. Just type your question in there, and I will do my very best to get it answered by our two great panelists. So I'm going to turn to Bill now. What to you are the levers that the government, you've mentioned a couple already, but is there anything else you would want to highlight as something that could be done to help with this inequality problem? And let me preface that, though, with a little bit of a provocative question. What you'll hear from conservatives sometimes is, oh, you're a leveler. You're a solution to inequality is to bring down the rich rather than bring up the poor. Is that a valid complaint by conservatives, and where the emphasis should be on bringing up the poor rather than bringing down the rich?
Well, I think the rich, as Fitzgerald said, are different than you and me, and they uh, seem to rarely be held accountable by the justice system, and I think we see that kind of in spades in this whole, Epstein quagmire we're in. I think they also are very, very good at avoiding taxes, as we can also see in some of the people I write about who incredibly turned to Jeffrey Epstein to help them with that, and it actually seemed to be fairly effective. So they and because especially in the financial world, a lot of them pay just capital gains taxes, or like in the case of Elon Musk, never or well, Twitter deal aside, kind of rarely sells his stock, merely borrows against it, and then the interest on that borrowing is tax deductible. And so they, never have to sell their stock when they die. The basis is inherited by their heirs, the higher basis. So, I mean, I think that these techniques that are frankly probably perfectly legal most of the time, doesn't mean that people do them legally always, but basically they're probably legal. And again, getting back to Dean's point that this is, these laws and the structure of the system is really lately been skewed entirely to benefit the wealthy, both from a Citizens United point of view, from a lobbying point of view. As somebody said, if you wanted to solve the problem with the TSA, people getting paid, aside from Trump now, whatever, doing an executive order, just make all the tail numbers of the private jets not be able to fly until this matter is resolved, and it would be resolved very quickly. So I think there's a lot of sort of not only structural benefits that the wealthy get, there's also cultural benefits. I hear all the time about cutbacks looming. Again, I've been doing a lot of writing about this Paramount, Skydance, and Warner Brothers deal, so I'm intimately familiar with it. $6 billion in quote synergies need to be cut. At the same time, David Zaslav, God bless his heart, is hauling out $575 million. And we also know that, like, the superstars in every industry, whether it's in movies, whether it's in TV shows, whether it's in influencers, whether it's in social media, whether it's in writing or technology or whatever it is, or athletics. There's no limit on what those people can get paid. But for everybody else, it's like, where's the cutbacks? The raise is going to be 1%, if anything. Sorry, you were getting, $2 a word for your writing. Now you're going to get $1 a word. I mean, so we're creating this inequality in so many different ways. And then you ask, what can the government can do? I mean, there's no fiscal responsibility anymore. When I was growing up, the Republican Party, God bless them, was supposedly the party of fiscal responsibility. Now, Trump has added more to the national debt than any other president before him, and now it's 37 trillion, and nobody even talks about that. Nobody even talks about trying to balance the budget. There have been efforts to do that, but it's like, no. In fact, we're going to cut, your healthcare benefits, but oh, by the way, we need $200 billion for this war in Iran that apparently is the most important thing he has ever done in his life, and it's been building up for 47 years. So thank God for him for doing that. I mean, the inconsistencies that create inequalities, that make the system, make everybody scratching their head as to what the heck is going on. Congress is completely impotent, and and the Supreme Court passed Citizens United and has done all sorts of other crazy things. It's no wonder that people are losing faith, in the system, and don't know what to do about it. Peter, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, I was on mute.
I can be the moderator too.
Yeah, there you go. One particular thing you said I want to circle back to, where you were talking about superstars in different fields, and you mentioned sports. I think you might have mentioned entertainment. Now, a lot of people would say that's different because those people deserve what they got there. It's a free market. If people want to throw money at superstar basketball players or tennis players or actors, then so be it. And what they complain more about is sectors where they feel like the system is rigged. So the people are earning kind of rents, you might say. They're earning extraordinary amounts of money just because they figured out a way to twist the rules to their advantage. Do you make a distinction like that?
Yeah, I think it's all a market-based decision trees. I mean, I think, no matter what it is, you talk to an owner of a sports team, he's got a million reasons why, he has to pay Jaylen Brown or whatever, $60 million a year. I mean, there's in every field, in every profession, any CEO I talk to, he or she can immediately justify why they're paying somebody what they're paying. At the same time, the ability to hold two opposing thoughts in your head at the same time, is that the definition of insanity? I don't know what it is, but at the same time saying, "Oh, we got to cut $6 billion out of this thing," and it might be as much as 10 or 12 or 15 billion, and if we don't, this whole thing is going down the tubes. And so it's like, yes, superstars, they make exceptions for in every profession, and it's only getting worse. The dichotomy between the superstars and the merely stars is, and heaven forbid, the people who are just quote unquote average. So there's this huge discrepancy, and at the same time, every CEO I know is always talking about how we've got to right size, we've got to downsize, we've got to rationalize, we've got to get the synergies, and all that is just code for cutting jobs, cutting compensation. Meanwhile, they're of course hoovering out many, many, many millions of dollars, and then there's also the dichotomy that exists, with people who've been participating in the stock market in the last 40 years, since the quote unquote bull market began in '82, and even when Trump took over and Trump won. I remember when he first got elected in November 2015. That night, the stock market went down 1,000 points, and then quickly recovered, and it was at about 17,000 now, and now it's at 50,000. So that's like 3 times your money. So there are a lot, and that's just on average. I mean, if you
Right.
invested in OpenAI or Tesla or any of these, Magnificent Seven, you've made a shitload of money, and so a lot of wealth has been created. Again, to the and get taxed the capital gains if you even sell, as opposed to borrow against it. And a lot of the population misses out on that.
Yes. So I'll ask another question from the audience. And please, people, I urge you to submit your questions. This is your opportunity. This is from another anonymous attendee. She said, as a future social worker, I see that envy toward the top 1% could fuel some social unrest and reduce consumer confidence, especially in our current political environment. From your perspective, how important is it to address perceptions of fairness or feelings of envy and wealth distribution to maintain a stable market environment? So I think the question is specifically stable market environment. I'm going to ask Dean first, since he hasn't talked for a little while.
Yeah, hopefully my connection's better now. But anyhow, I'm not too worried about a lack of consumption, because the fact is the rich have been consuming just fine. So, for a lot of, middle income people, moderate income people, their consumption does seem to have been lagging. I mean, we don't have great data on that, but it does seem to be the case. I've played around with it, as have others, and it does look like their consumption's lagging. But again, I do think, for the reasons you and Bill were talking about, I think it is important people feel the system's fair. I mean, that creates the resentment we see that is behind, electing a Donald Trump, or, supporting, to my view, really horribly racist policies that people, they often misplace. It's not Somali immigrants that's taking anyone's money away, but, people can come to believe that. And just picking up on some of the points Bill made, we keep going forever. So he goes, I didn't say anything about the tax deductibility of interest. I didn't. But what about carried interest deduction? I don't know if people are familiar with this, but it really is just an incredible scam. Carried interest deduction is that hedge fund partners, private equity partners, some real estate investment trust. I don't know all the fall in the category, but almost invariably, these are very, very rich people. And what it is that they can, in effect, get part of their pay as get counted as capital gains. In fact, most of their pay gets counted as capital gains. So if you have someone who's a decent salary, a middle income school teacher, firefighter, you're likely paying taxes at a 25% rate, a marginal rate. If you're someone earning maybe $1 billion a year, which is what some of these people could pocket as a private equity partner or hedge fund partner, you're only paying at a capital gains rate that camps out at 20%, which is kind of incredible. I mean, it's one of these things. When I first heard about it, a friend of mine told me about it, and he wasn't an economist. Not that economists are brilliant, but we're supposed to know about the economy. So I thought, no, it can't be right. So I looked it up, and it was right. And then I contacted a friend of mine, a conservative economist, who's in the Bush administration, and I said, what's the rationale for this? And he said, well, these are very rich and powerful people. I go, no, I know that. I mean, what's the economic rationale? And he said, there isn't one. So, it's one of these things, the simplest way to think about it is they get incentive pay, kind of like a realtor gets incentive pay or a car dealer gets incentive pay. Lots of people in the economy get incentive pay. They're taxed on it as ordinary income. But because these people are very wealthy, they carve out this little loophole for themselves that could save them millions, tens of millions a year in taxes. And yes, people are very right to think that's not fair because it's not. So there's a long, long list of things like that again, it makes these people very rich. And I should carry over a little bit on the envy story because it goes further. So if you have, a Bill Gates, I looked it up once, I can't remember. He has property. I'm sure it's property many places, but my family lives in Seattle now. So he has property on Lake Washington, beautiful lake in Seattle. I think he's actually one of the suburbs, whatever. He has this huge plot of land. Well, because he has a huge plot of land for his estate, that's otherwise could have been housing for I don't know how many people. Now, obviously, Bill Gates personally doesn't matter that much, but the point is when you have rich people that could have two, three, four homes, they're very large, they have, that drives up house prices for everyone. So it's not just envy. There might be that, and I can understand it, but it goes beyond that.
Yeah, yeah, fair point. I want to turn to artificial intelligence, which is the issue of the year, and ask both of you how you feel the rise of AI will change inequality. Will it make it worse? Will it make it better? I'll stick with you, Dean, while you still have the mic.
Great, that's a great question, and I'll just throw out a couple of thoughts because I can't say I have an answer to it. I don't know anyone does at this point. Obviously, the people, the top execs, the people with a lot of money and a lot of shares in the AI companies are making out fabulously. I don't know they'll continue to be the case. I mean, I've speculated it's a bubble. I could be wrong, but I saw the housing bubble that proved to be right. We had a tech bubble in the '90s, which I was yelling about, and that proved to be right. So if that does deflate, because there's not the big bucks there for those companies, which could be for a variety of reasons. One of the things that I've been following is Chinese competition, but whatever. They won't be as rich as they are today, if that proves to be the case, which I frankly hope it does. But what it does beyond that, how many jobs, it will cost jobs, but the idea that none of us are going to have jobs, I don't buy that. And I'm old enough to have lived through the '90s. People were saying very similar things in the '90s about automation. It's going to take everyone's job. And this predates me. I guess I was a little kid, but there were debates in the '60s. Same thing. There were hearings before the Senate. I think it was the Senate, could have been the House, but I'm pretty sure the Senate about how automation was going to displace jobs. There was a great book by Kurt Vonnegut, Cat's Cradle, that no player piano. I'm sorry, player piano. There are no jobs for anyone. Because technology. So it's an old story, and in general, it's not proven to be true. Now, what I do think is going to be the case, I'm fairly confident this, is that there will be an uptick in productivity, which means that in principle, we could all be wealthier. Now, how is that shared? That will be up for grabs. If we don't have government policies, and I won't just say government policies to help workers, if we have government policies to hurt workers, like make it harder for unions to organize, if we see an increase in the unemployment rate and the government doesn't try to respond to that with some sort of stimulus program, then disproportionately the gains from that will go to higher end people, and that's a big problem. But I don't blame AI on that one. I mean, it's a new technology. It's an important technology that I'm sure of. But the idea that it will inevitably lead to more inequality, that's going to be a matter of government policy. That's not an inevitable outcome.
Bill, what are your thoughts?
Well, first, let me say how nice it is to have Dean back with with his internet connection working properly. So that's a blessing. I think I'm sort of viewing it like I viewed, Google search at the beginning, a very useful tool. I find it to be a very useful and user-friendly tool, and it's able to answer a lot of questions quickly. You have to check its work. You have to make sure, it's right, which requires some extra work, but it's able to summarize a situation where, as people's memories get faultier as they get older, you might say, well, what happened in this deal back then or this situation back then, and it is able to dredge it up amazingly quickly and sort of lay it out, and then you have to check it. So I think in that way, it's a very useful productivity tool. I was at a one of these fancy quasi-secret retreats last summer in Wyoming, where all these sort of heads of, very smart people had assembled. And one thing that came out of that was that AI was going to, as Dean was saying, was going to result in huge job losses with more productivity and more profitability. And that sort of got everybody kind of concerned and spooked. And I think there's some companies where that might be happening, like Palantir and others. But I think, and look, I know a lot of, on Wall Street and among law firms, there's, concern. Well, we can, what used to take a junior banker, a week to do a model or spread comps or whatever it is can now be done, in about 30 minutes by, AI. And so are we even going to need those junior bankers anymore? Of course, if you don't have those junior bankers, then they don't over time become senior bankers. And that, of course, is an apprenticeship business, as is law firms. And so you still need those junior people so they can develop into becoming senior people over time and learn the craft of law or investment banking or whatever it is. And so I think and I personally don't think an artificial intelligence can interview people and then, take the reporting that you get from that interview and turn it into a book or an article. So that requires judgment and synthesis and, interviewing abilities and writing abilities. So I'm not particularly worried about that. I do worry, and I wrote a piece in the Washington Post maybe a year or two ago about how my data was being hoovered up by Microsoft's AI at OpenAI and others. These trillion-dollar companies are hoovering up my proprietary output, my content that I've created without asking me for permission or compensating me, and they just hoover it up, and then next thing you know, it's all in this thing, and I haven't been, I feel like I'm being kind of taken advantage of, and by these trillion-dollar companies who should know better and who should have figured out that they need to compensate the content creators for what they've been doing instead of stealing it. So there's been no resolution to that, obviously, although Anthropic has some sort of settlement that they've worked out where they're going to apparently, give people something for what they've done. But bottom line for me is it's a pretty interesting tool. It's a productivity tool. It helps me think through things pretty quickly. Not always right. I have to make sure to check it. But I'm not worried about it replacing, I don't think it can replace what journalists do. Yes, it can write things, but it's pretty much garbage, and you can just tell that it's written by a non-human. And so, we have to see, but I'm viewing it more as a useful tool at the moment.
Yeah. I
If
think
I
I'm
could jump in
a,
for a moment, I just want to add a couple points to what Bill's saying on AI, because I think, you know, his point about copyright and it's hoovering up his work, you know, that that's exactly, I'm not arguing that they should hoover up his work, but it's exactly my point that I was making earlier, that we set the rules. There's nothing intrinsic that it either can or can't hoover up Bill's work without paying them. I mean, you know, again, I'm not arguing whether it's good or bad. I mean, I think Bill should be compensated, so I'll say that. But you know, but the point is, those are rules of the market. That's not something that I'm saying rules given by the government. That's not something that will just be generated by the market. The other point that you know Bill alluded to, that it is replacing some labor. So it's not, you know, again, I was saying that I don't think we have to worry about mass unemployment, or at least not anytime soon. But Peter, you earlier raised this issue about skills bias, technical change. I think it's very likely that this will go the other way. So I know lawyers that use AI say it's great; they could get so much more done. So they ask, you know, the program to give them a draft on this, that, or that. Now they have to redo it. They can't just, you know, and some I know some lawyers have handed in things from AI, and the judges throw their case out, which I think you do. Obviously, you'd be a bad lawyer to do that, but a good lawyer could say, okay, have the AI write a draft or some part of it or whatever, and use that to build on, which makes hugely increases their productivity. But what that means is you need fewer lawyers. So that's a case where you know the skills bias goes the other way, because obviously lawyers are very highly skilled in the scheme of things and tend to be relatively highly paid. We're likely to need fewer lawyers because of AI. So I think that's an important point.
yeah, well, let me just pick up on that because you could argue that it's still biased in favor of skills, but that it's only the very highest skills that are being preserved. For example, the senior partner who's been around for decades is going to be have his or her skills amplified. Everybody below that person will lose out. And going to Bill's example, you know, Bill is doing a very high level of journalism, but there are sort of other things that journalists have traditionally done, like writing up the daily stock market report, which are already being automated. You can see the articles are sports. A lot of ordinary like NFL scores. The Associated Press is using AI for this. Bloomberg has a lot of AI generated stuff. So there are still going to be a role for journalists and lawyers and doctors, but a vast swath of those jobs, I think, could potentially go away.
Well, if you're going to define lawyers and doctors who aren't the top doctors as less skilled, you're talking about a very small swath. And at least in the case of lawyers, I'd have to think more about what a top doctor is. But in case of, you know, your senior partners at law firms, what's their skill? They have social contacts. Um, you're welcome to call that skill, but that didn't come from the technology. That came from, you know, Epstein. I mean, not to pick on the name of the day, but I mean that's the sort of thing. You have a circle of friends that give you big contracts for your firm because they're your circle of friends. You know, you can call that a skill if you want, but I think that's kind of making it up as you go along.
Yeah, I take your point. Although Bill's probably going to want to jump into this, but I'll just
Yeah.
say that what I am actually arguing that the tide is rising and that there are fewer and fewer people are still going to have their heads above water. Bill?
Well, I mean, so it's absolutely true that the senior partner, it's not only his social network, which is a very important point, Dean, but it's also their judgment that is established over many years of apprenticeship learning, learning from others with judgment, and being involved in all sorts of kinds of deals and situations. And so that when you are the senior partner or a senior partner, and you know, a client hires you, they're hiring you for your judgment and your wisdom in a specific situation, and that cannot be replicated by you know, a machine. And then you to create that senior partner. That senior partner was once a peon, a junior person who came in out of college or wherever. How did they get? How did they had to rise in the ranks over many years, and proving that they had good judgment every step of the way, so they didn't get fired or do something stupid or embarrass the firm. And so if you don't have those, guess what? Nobody lives forever. Nobody gets out alive. And at some point, the senior partner is no longer displaying good judgment or wisdom because their brain is whatever atrophying. And you need to create that pipeline, and you can't just get rid of all those junior people because a machine can do it more quickly, can do a spreadsheet more quickly, or write a brief more quickly, or an S1 more quickly, because you need to develop. These are all apprenticeship businesses: medicine, law, banking, a million other things. And so, you develop in an apprentice, making an Hermes bag, those are apprenticeship businesses, and you need to develop those very fine skills over a great period of time. And a machine just can't do that.
Yeah. Changing the subject just a bit, which is let's suppose that a lot of people do become rendered superfluous by AI. They just can't get a job that pays them anything. How do you feel about having a universal basic income, one that could supposedly be funded partly by the tax revenues imposed on owners of AI?
Well, I'll just say if it's really the case that we have this massive increase in productivity from AI, we have no problem paying for basic income. But I guess I'll say a couple of things. One is that as a political matter, if you look at the opposition to the supports that we put in place in the pandemic, keeping them, the child tax credit, which is a trivial amount of money, and for kids, I mean, and there was massive opposition to that. So how do you get from there to basic income for everyone? Good luck. So that's a tough political road to hoe. But the other point I'll make on this is that there had been an idea that as we got wealthier, we would work fewer hours and, in fact, spread the work around. That's not a new idea. I mean, that was part of the Fair Labor Standards Act and passed in 1937, the New Deal. That's why we had overtime. So if you work more than 40 hours a week, you get time and a half pay. Discourage companies from forcing workers to work overtime. And by the way, it's usually not a choice. The company says you have to work more hours. So rather than being 40 hours a week, how about 35? How about 32? We could do that. In fact, other countries have. That's a big difference between the United States and West Europe. West Europe, Germany, France, Netherlands, pick your country. The average work year is 25% fewer hours than the United States. So I think that's probably more politically and probably more desirable, that rather than saying, oh, we're just going to have 20% of our workforce not working, 20% people want a job not working. Instead, let's shorten the work week, have longer vacations, paid family leave. That's a very good story in my view. And again, that's a great case where government policy can make a big difference. 40-hour work week wasn't given to us by God. That was a decision made in 1937. And back then, I think most people involved in that would have expected it would get lower. If you go back and read Keynes, who wrote during the Depression, he expected the work week would keep getting shorter. I think he was talking about we'd work 1 week a month. We didn't go that way. But anyhow, I think that would be a good way to go.
Bill, let me ask a question from the audience. We've gotten some good ones in. I'll go to Bill first on this one. This is from an anonymous attendee again. Do you believe inequality is ever beneficial? And if it's unavoidable, how do we determine what level becomes harmful versus acceptable?
Do I ever think inequality, there's a value to having income inequality?
Yeah.
I think that I think it's fair to say that not everybody is created equal. I know we all say everybody's a winner. Everybody, should have equal opportunities, which I certainly agree with. I don't think everybody is a winner, though. I think, people have different skills, different motivations, different energy levels, different intelligence. And so I think, one nice thing about our country is that it rewards the people who, want to work the hardest, who have a great idea. If you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. I think there's something good about creating those incentives for people. You know, if you're like Elon Musk and can, have like five or six, be CEO of five or six different highly technical companies at the same time, and you're going to get rewarded for that. I mean, I think that's something that Americans have in their DNA, and it's kind of remarkable and admirable. But at the same time, in that sort of Darwinian system that we have, and we have advanced Darwinian capitalism that we're operating under, people get left behind. And so I think you have to combine that, all the good things about that, with a safety net for people. But you don't want to cover, you don't want people to lose incentive. You don't want people to get uh, uh, so that they don't want to go out and try to find a job, and they just want to rely on the dole. And I mean, I wouldn't want to live like that, but I don't think it's not a healthy way to live. I think people should get help if they need it. Absolutely, we should take care of their health care. We should probably have more social net like in Scandinavian countries, because we are a wealthy country. We can afford things like that. If we can afford $200 billion on a stupid war in Iran, we can afford to have a bigger safety net. But you also, I think, want to encourage people to get out there, get off their butt, work hard, try to do what they're good at, and not be reliant on the dole.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a question from Dane DeVoe. It's a long one, so I'll just ask the beginning and the end. The beginning is, it seems to me that what started out as Reaganomics never came to an end and has continued to grow. And this is the idea of supply side economics, trickle down. The question is, has supply side economics run its course? I'm going to ask Dean first. Has supply side economics run its course? Is it creating more problems than the benefits it's been touted for, Dean?
Well, I don't know if it ever ran anywhere. I mean, not to say that there weren't some benefits from reducing tax rates, because there were problems with the tax code. There's always going to be problems with the tax code. That goes without saying. But you go, is there evidence that it led to more investment, more growth? I think, you could beat up the data and maybe you could show a small positive. You could also show a small negative. I think it gave us inequality with no real payoff. And, picking up on what Bill's saying, we've never had perfect equality. We had inequality in the 50s and 60s, much less than what we do today. And the economy actually grew very rapidly. So I think there's kind of a myth that, if you don't have, the extremes of inequality we have, then you're going to have a stagnant economy. That's literally not true. And in fact, I was actually looking at the numbers. A friend of mine called my attention to this. If you compare Europe to the US, there's kind of this conventional wisdom that, US is growing very rapidly and Europe's being left behind. But if you actually look at a different measure, if you look at, I don't want to get too much into technical details, but it's common, usually when we're comparing living standards across countries, we look at purchasing power parity GDP. I won't go into great detail, but essentially it tries to calculate the price of all goods using a common set of prices. So we use the same price for a car in Germany and Japan and the US, the same price for a refrigerator, for a haircut, whatever. It's imperfect, but if you do that, they actually have not fallen behind the US. So they were a little behind the US 30 years ago. They're still a little behind the US. That's per person. So the idea that there's some big premium from inequality, that's a claim that the evidence really doesn't support. So again, I'm not saying we want zero inequality. We had inequality in the 50s. We had inequality in the 60s. We don't need the sort of inequality we have today. And again, that was, to my view, generated by policies, deliberate policies. It was not something that just happened. We did it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. All right. I want to have anybody who hasn't thought of a question yet or thought of it but hasn't written it, please write it, because we're going to wind up before too long. Here's one that's a bit off topic, but I still think you might have something to say about it. Michael James is asking, is the United States becoming insolvent? Can you unpack this for the layperson? Should the middle class on down be concerned? Dean, we stick with you for now.
Well, people look at our debt. I think we're at 38 trillion now. I haven't checked it lately, but something like that. And you get a lot of people running around going, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." It's high, no doubt about that. It's high relative to GDP, which is high. Most economists would say that's the relevant measure. It's about 120% of GDP, which is higher than we'd ever been. We were close to that at the end of World War II, but I think we're somewhat higher today. Again, I'd have to double check that, but I think we're somewhat higher. Are we close to being insolvent? My answer is no. I mean, no one, well, I'll qualify it in a second. My answer is no in terms of the debt, that no one is worried that, if they own a treasury bill, $1,000 treasury bill or whatever, that they won't get it back. What I will say is that our solvency depends on confidence in the United States having, I'm trying to think of a polite word here, a sane government, that we're not a banana republic. And if people came to see us as a banana republic, solvency might be a relevant question. Now, to be clear what that means, we'd see a huge amount of inflation. People don't want to hold U.S. assets, so we'd see a mass sell-off of stocks, of bonds, of all sorts of dollar-denominated assets. I'm not predicting that, but I would just say that that's not something that's out of the realm of the possible. Ordinarily, I would say that, and this is bipartisan. So when we had, Biden, Obama, Bush 1, Bush 2, that was not a real concern. Currently, we have a government that, does not follow rules, doesn't care about international laws. It's a matter of policy. They say they don't. So I would consider that a possibility, but it's not because we have debt. If our debt were 1 trillion, the story wouldn't be any different. The problem would be that people think we have a crazy government and they don't want to trust their money to a crazy government.
Yeah. All right. Bill, I'm going to read one comment we got. It's really more of a comment than a question, but I just maybe after I read it, you'll see if you have any effect. So Laura Nipmeyer says, in healthcare, even mental health care, we have giant companies looking to replace person-to-person interactions, such as crisis hotlines. As a relatively affluent person, I'm horrified that we are seeing triage on the phone, such as press 1 for suicidal, press 2 for something else. So we are all stuck in the lower economy. Yes, I feel threatened. Any thoughts?
Well, I think we can all agree we've really got ourselves into a situation with our healthcare system, because it's a death care system. And it's run by the insurance industry, and as everybody I know knows this, because they feel it, that they're paying all these premiums to the insurance companies, and then when they need healthcare coverage, everything is a fight. Every single thing, and it's obscured in its paperwork that is absolutely hard to decipher. But at the end of it all, you pay the premiums, and then you don't get coverage when you need the coverage. When you need the help, you pay thousands of dollars for your annual physical, and it's not covered. And so people just like are wondering what the heck do I do? Do I self-insure? Do I take that risk, or do I just sort of live with it and know that if I have something big that requires hospitalization, that seems to get covered for some reason, but the annual physical checkups don't, or the blood work doesn't, or the shots don't. I don't know. It's a crazy system. I don't think it's working. I mean, in New York, we do have, very good healthcare system, but try getting insurance companies to pay for it. It's very, very difficult, and we all sit here and sort of marvel at what our friend Luigi did. But on the other hand, I think a lot of people say, yeah, they can kind of relate to that, except for the killing part. I mean, they can kind of relate to how frustrating this healthcare system is.
Yeah. I think Laura is making that point, but I think she's making a kind of interesting point there, which is like, even if you are well-to-do in the society, you're still getting shunted into phone trees that are run by AI. That's why, we're all stuck in the lower economy. It feels like it's taken over and turning us all into adjuncts to the robot society.
Well, I live in New York City, and yes, I feel, affluent enough. But I don't get shunted into a phone tree. I can get through to the secretaries or the assistants who work for the doctor. I can't necessarily get through to the doctor, can't necessarily get an appointment. I can't necessarily get my insurance company to cover that appointment when I do get it. But I haven't been shunted to a phone tree.
Lucky
Not for
you.
that anyway. Lucky
Lucky
me.
you.
Lucky
Okay.
me.
I'm going to bring Jenny back in now. I'll just say before I turn it over to her that I think it's been a great conversation, Dean and Bill and audience. Thank you for all your great questions. And Jenny, over to you. You're on mute, Jenny. There
Thank
you
you.
go.
Thanks for that. Dean, Bill, Peter, this has been an important discussion, and we are so grateful for your insight and your time. We hope you'll return to NFRPP to continue this conversation. Thank you all for participating in tonight's panel. A video of tonight's program will be available in the coming days on our website and our YouTube channel. To our audience, if you value our timely, fact-based programming, please consider supporting our work. Donate securely now at nfrpp.org/donate. We need your support to continue our work during these challenging and uncertain times. Your support is critical. Sign up for our newsletter to learn more about upcoming programs. Our next program is May 19th, and aptly we will discuss the American dream. Thank you all, and good night.
Hi.
Night night.
Thank